with our new car, our new F-Zero.
Okay. Good morning, and welcome to our hearing, Follow the Money, Accountability and Transparency in Recovery Act Science Spending. I understand Dr. Brown, the ranking member, ranking Republican of the subcommittee, will be with us shortly. Mr. Bilbray is serving in his stead for the moment. This committees or subcommittees hearings usually or frequently have as witnesses people that we think may have done wrong. None of our witnesses today have done wrong yet, anyway. But we want to hear from you on how you're going to do right. Our purpose today is twofold: to learn how agencies in this committee's legislative jurisdiction intend to distribute funds available under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and then to examine what will be done to guarantee that those funds are not awarded improperly or wasted. Last Thursday, President Obama told state officials seeking guidance on the use of Recovery Act funds that if we see money being misspent, we're going to put a stop to it. I assume he would give the same warning to universities, to scientists, to businesses seeking funds from our agencies, and today we will begin to find out how that will be accomplished. Congress and the President enacted the Recovery Act to respond to extraordinary circumstances. It leaves the agencies to walk a fine line. If you want to jumpstart the economy by expanding employment, the money in this bill needs to get into the pipeline quickly. But Congress did not relieve the agencies of their responsibility to adhere to federal contracting rules when distributing the funds, which takes time and skilled personnel, first to award the grant or contract, and then to manage the contract in a way that ensures a productive outcome. The innovations in the Recovery Act are not in streamlining contracting techniques. Rather, the Act requires agencies to gather more information regarding their awards and to make that information more available to the public than has ever been done before. The Act also sets up elaborate systems among the Inspectors General and the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, to ensure that waste, fraud, and abuse are at a minimum. It's probably unrealistic to think that they'll be eliminated entirely. All of this, expanded spending, transparent competition, and awards tracking, and accountability after the award has been made, must be carried out while dealing with the ordinary agency, the IG, and GAO business. Our first panel has been asked to explain how they intend to balance these competing pressures and to accomplish the goals of the Recovery Act. The witnesses on the panel represent the designated accountability officers of the Department of Energy, NASA, NSF, and Department of Commerce. They are in the front line of conversations with OMB and program divisions in their agencies and about carrying out the Recovery Act. Congress turns to IGs and the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, for expertise in accountability. Our witnesses on the second panel bring to bear their experience in detecting waste, fraud, and abuse, something that will be vital for managing the outflow of Recovery Act dollars. With the pressure to move the money, we cannot depend solely on audits after the fact to avoid diversion of those grants and contracts. I expect to hear that they are closely cooperating with the agency management to build protections into project evaluation and procurements. The late Senator from Illinois, Everett Dirksen, is credited with the line, "A billion here, a billion there." Pretty soon you're talking about real money. Today we're talking about 20 times that amount of money. When the stimulus funds run out next year, we want to know where the money went, if those funds succeeded in meeting the goals that Congress set. This committee will particularly want to know, did they provide investments needed to increase economic efficiency by spurring technological advances in science and health? I expect to hear from our witnesses that this will not be an easy task, but one that you are prepared to tackle and get right. Since this is just the first hearing on this subject, more to look forward to, for this subcommittee, we anticipate monitoring progress along these lines over the course of the 111th Congress. I now recognize the committee's ranking member, if he has caught his breath, the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. Brown, for his opening statement.
I thank the chairman, and I beg his forgiveness and the panel's forgiveness for running late. Something very important came up and delayed me a bit, and I came running literally from my office here. So I apologize, and I hope y'all forgive me for running late. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing and commend you for addressing oversight at our science agencies. This committee has an important responsibility to ensure that funding from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act is spent appropriately. And I look forward to working with you, Chairman Gordon and Ranking Member Hall, to make sure we do just that. Addressing oversight, accountability, and transparency at agencies is an important task, but Congress should also be held to these same principles. In attempting to live up to these standards, Democratic leadership has failed the American people. The stimulus bill was bloated with earmarks and pushed through Congress without a single oversight hearing. We will hear from witnesses shortly about the importance of preventing waste, fraud, and abuse ahead of time rather than trying to detect it after the fact. They will speak to the need to get policies and procedures for spending money established early in the process instead of playing gotcha after the money has been spent. This is important guidance that we will insist the agencies follow. Yet the irony of the situation is that Congress never did this work itself. Without a single hearing by any committee, the Democratic leadership has tripled our nation's debt and forced us to borrow from our children, grandchildren, and foreign nations. We spent $787 billion in this bill. To put this into perspective, last year's budget for non-security discretionary spending was roughly $390 billion. That's almost twice as much as last year's budget and doesn't even take into account the omnibus or other bailouts that we've passed on top of that. Neither this committee nor any other had a role in developing appropriate oversight, accountability, and transparency measures necessary for such an enormous bill. We never held a hearing or a single markup. Therefore, it is somewhat comical to talk about stimulus, accountability, and transparency when there wasn't any behind this bill's formulation. Don't get me wrong. Making sure our science agencies are funded at the appropriate authorization levels is important, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about not learning from the lessons of post-Katrina disaster relief, Iraq reconstruction, and the Trouble Asset Relief Program. All instances where expediency trumped accountability and the taxpayer suffered. I was outraged, just as the American people were, to hear that AIG executives received taxpayer money as bonuses while their company crumbled around them. If the stimulus bill had seen the light of day, perhaps Democratic leadership would not have been able to add a loophole for AIG executive bonuses. History has shown that throwing as much money as we can out the window as fast as we can has never ended well. The Congress should have known this and taken a more measured approach to aiding our economy. Which brings me to an important point. Obama administration economic advisor Larry Summers indicated numerous times that the stimulus bill would be, quote, timely, targeted, and temporary, unquote. I have serious concerns about the impact that a temporary surge of money will have on our scientific enterprise. A temporary influx of funds without a long-term commitment will lead to a boom and bust scenario similar to that experienced by NIH after its budget doubled earlier this decade. As Science Magazine noted in a 2007 article, quote, between 1998 and 2003, the budget of the National Institutes of Health rose from $13 billion to more than $27 billion in a plan known as the doubling. Now that tsunami of cash has receded. Many life scientists, especially those in the early phase of their careers, have found conditions no better and in some ways worse than before the process began, unquote. While the Obama administration has clearly indicated that this enormous influx of money will be, quote, temporary, unquote, our investment in science should be steady and predictable, not volatile and fleeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the witnesses' testimony and look forward to working with you going forward. Oversight in a truly nonpartisan endeavor. We may have disagreements on the underlying substance and process associated with the stimulus bill, but I hope now that the dust is settled, we can work together in a productive manner to minimize waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement at our science agencies. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I ask unanimous consent. I'm not sure I need to, but I ask unanimous consent that any additional opening statements submitted by members will be included in the record. And without objection, that is so ordered. It is now my pleasure to introduce our witnesses at this time. Dr. Cora Marrett is the Senior Accountability Officer and Acting Deputy Director at the National Science Foundation. Mr. Ronald Spoehel. I'm glad that you pronounced that because everyone would have thought that your name was really Spell and that Dr. Brown and I were simply pronouncing it with our accents.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, my family either can't spell or can't pronounce. Brown spelled B-R-O-U-N, so I know names are peculiar for folks. And how is it pronounced, actually, sir? Spoehel?
Spoehel.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Right. Pretty much phonetically how we would pronounce S-P-E-L-L.
Oh, spell.
Right.
Well, you got to give me some slack with my Georgia accent. Spoehel.
Like mine is different.
That's right.
Mr. Spoehel is the Chief Financial Officer of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Ms. Helen Herbst is a Senior Officer of Recovery and Implementation with the U.S. Department of Commerce, and Mr. Matthew Rogers is the Senior Advisor to Secretary Chu at the U.S. Department of Energy. As our witnesses should know, you will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When you all have completed your oral testimony, we will have questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. It is the practice of this subcommittee to receive testimony under oath. Since I said earlier, none of you have done wrong yet. I don't think you have to worry about anything, but we do take testimony under oath. Do any of you have any objection to swearing an oath, to taking an oath? You also have a right to be represented by counsel. We're trying to make you as at ease as we can by asking you these questions. Do any of you have counsel here? Okay. Now, if you would all please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Okay. The record will reflect that all the witnesses took the oath. We will now begin with Dr. Cora Marrett. Dr. Marrett, you may begin.
Thank you for inviting me on behalf of the National Science Foundation. I am Cora Marrett, Acting Deputy Director and Senior Accountability Officer for Recovery Act activities at NSF. NSF is honored to have a role in stimulating the American economy. The $3 billion entrusted to us will sustain and advance major research initiatives, enhance support for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education, and help renew America's research infrastructure. The immediate impact will be felt by investigators, postdoctoral fellows, graduate and undergraduate students, and teachers throughout the nation. We now support nearly 200,000 of these individuals every year. We expect to add approximately 50,000 in fiscal year 2009 with recovery funds. Over the long run, our investments should help the nation meet the increasing demands for new knowledge and innovative technologies. We are confident that NSF can maintain the highest standards of competitive merit review, distribute the funds in a timely manner, and meet all of the requirements for accountability and transparency. We have formal policies and procedures for implementing the guidance, and a plan for allocating the funds. Moreover, we have proposals and procedures, we have proposals in place that merit the funding and procedures for handling expeditiously the other proposals we will receive. For all of these reasons, NSF is confident that we can make the first awards within the next few weeks. Of the $3 billion allotted to NSF, $2.5 billion is for research and related activities, $400 million for major research equipment and facilities construction, and $100 million for education and human resources. Now, not only is NSF prepared to distribute the funds, but so are the science and engineering, research and education communities poised to expend the funds quickly and effectively. We recognize the importance of building and maintaining the confidence of Congress and the American people. We maintain an unwavering commitment to our merit review processes, processes considered by many to be the gold standard for achieving excellence, accountability, and transparency in grant making. NSF will not compromise the fairness and competitiveness that mark our processes. And we can make this commitment given the caliber of our staff and of our management practices, both refined over many decades. Now, we have more than a plan for the Recovery Act funds. We have a structure in place. As the Senior Accountability Officer, I oversee a steering committee drawn from across the agency. Several members of the committee themselves direct Tiger teams, teams with responsibilities aligned with the requirements of the Recovery Act. We are working closely with the National Science Board, our governing body, and our Office of the Inspector General. These connections will help us meet the enhanced monitoring and reporting requirements of the Act. Personally, I take seriously my responsibility to deliver information in a timely way and to ensure the quality of that information. And in conclusion, then, the high expectations for NSF derive from the discoveries and the innovations that the agency has helped generate over the past 6 decades. The landmark legislation then enables us to strengthen our contributions and in so doing move forward the nation and the American people. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my remarks. I will certainly answer any questions should you have them.
Thank you, Dr. Marrett. Mr. Spoehel for 5 minutes.
Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Brown, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss steps being taken at NASA to implement the Recovery Act. The Recovery Act entrusts NASA with the stewardship of just over $1 billion of Recovery Act funds, with almost 95%, or $950 million, designated for expenditure on science, aeronautics, and exploration activities, and $50 million for cross-agency support activities prioritized for hurricane damage repair, along with $2 million for the NASA Office of Inspector General. While NASA is working aggressively to fulfill the Act's mandate of commencing Recovery Act activities and expenditures as quickly as possible, the agency is also committed to managing Recovery Act funding under the heightened level of transparency and accountability demanded by the Congress and the administration. We want the American people to rest assured that they will know where and how each of their Recovery Act dollars is being spent at NASA. NASA's planning, execution, reporting, and oversight for Recovery Act activities began early, even before the Act was signed by the President. NASA is still in the early stages of implementing Recovery Act-specific processes and activities. And while OMB guidance continues to evolve, it is my view that the Recovery Act requirements can be successfully implemented at NASA within a framework that substantially relies on existing agency processes and structures. NASA already has well-established and effective procedures in place for budget planning and execution and for procurement, as well as for internal controls and external reporting. And the agency intends to leverage those existing capabilities to accomplish rapid, timely Recovery Act planning and budget execution and procurements, while fully meeting all the requirements of the Act, related OMB guidance, and relevant laws and regulations. The agency's planning process for Recovery Act activities and the associated allocation of funds is well underway, consistent with Recovery Act direction provided by Congress and OMB guidance, and also consistent with NASA goals and priorities as established by the President and Congress. NASA senior management recognizes that meeting the commitments of the President and Congress will require sustained focus and accountability from all, particularly in the awarding, managing, and overseeing the contracts and grants funded by the Recovery Act. NASA's annual procurement obligations have exceeded $15 billion on average over the last 4 years, and the $1 billion of Recovery Act funds, most of which will go to contract awards, is just over 6% of that amount. For the Recovery Act funding, the agency intends to use its well-established processes and procedures for effectively and efficiently planning, awarding, and managing contract and grant awards in a fair and equitable manner. Oversight of the procurement process is maintained through several means, beginning with strong internal communication network within NASA's procurement community, monthly reviews of major procurements, periodic on-site intensive reviews of individual procurements, further supplemented by oversight and internal control reviews conducted regularly by the agency. NASA recognizes that these processes can only be effective if it maintains a skilled and knowledgeable cadre of acquisition professionals, and the agency has established a rigorous procurement training program as well as a contracting certification program. In closing, NASA is committed to the effective, efficient, and responsible use of the resources entrusted to the agency and to the implementation of a robust and comprehensive program that meets the requirements of the Recovery Act and other relevant guidance and laws, with the level of transparency and accountability demanded. I would be happy to respond to any questions you or the members of the committee may have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Spoehel. Ms. Herbst for 5 minutes.
Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Brown, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, my name is Ellen Herbst. I am the Senior Advisor for Recovery Implementation at the Department of Commerce, and I appreciate this opportunity to discuss how the Department of Commerce will implement the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Under the Recovery Act, the Commerce Department is receiving $7.9 billion. Commerce agencies receiving funding include the Economic Development Administration, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Bureau of the Census, and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And funding is also included for the Office of Inspector General to conduct audits and oversight. At the Commerce Department, Recovery Act funds will be used to invest in business development, innovative research, construction projects, expanding broadband services, and other programs that will create jobs and build a foundation for recovery. The subcommittee asks that my testimony focus on a number of important questions related to the Commerce Department's plan to ensure accountability and transparency. The Department has established a clear path forward for meeting our responsibilities under the Act. We are committed to allocating funding in an expeditious, open, and transparent manner that ensures accountability. To this end, we are working closely with the senior management in each of the 5 agencies receiving Recovery Act funds. Additionally, we are working with Commerce's Office of Budget and the Administration's Office of Management and Budget, and we are on track to transmit to Congress spending plans for agency programs funded in H.R. 1 within the time frame required. These plans will be posted to Commerce's recovery website. The Department is also committed to ensuring that all grants and contracts are awarded in a fair and timely manner. The Department has engaged its grants and acquisition councils to thoroughly review requirements of the Act, establish standardized reporting of grants and acquisitions awarded, ensure consistency in the wide dissemination of information to be made publicly available, and ensure the correct and complete recording of award information. Standard processes and procedures are to be followed in the awards of grants and contracts. At the same time, we are doing what we can to streamline and improve the underlying processes. Another key element of the Department's strategy involves staff competence. We've made significant progress in ensuring our acquisition corps meet government-wide certification requirements, and they will be working with other senior-level professionals and management to plan and execute the appropriate mechanisms for successful implementation of the Recovery Act. In all cases, our Office of Acquisition Management will be assisting the grants and acquisitions communities to ensure both timeliness and that the highest standards of accountability and transparency are met. The Department is also making sure we have the structures and personnel in place to ensure our compliance with OMB guidance. The Department appointed me as the senior staff person to coordinate, integrate, and manage our implementation of the Recovery Act. We too have formed a steering committee and have formed several work teams with representatives from all department offices and bureaus receiving funds to plan and implement the Act across the Department. We are also receiving proactive advice and education from our Office of Inspector General. Mr. Chairman, I will conclude with this. President Obama has called the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act the most sweeping economic recovery package in our history. At the Commerce Department, we are committed to working with the Congress, the President, and the American people to meet the highest standards of transparency and accountability in allocating this vital Recovery Act funding. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Herbst. Mr. Rogers for 5 minutes.
Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Brown, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss the U.S. Department of Energy's actions to assure accountability and transparency in Recovery Act funding, including our efforts to promote science and technology. Today's severe economic conditions demand rapid action. Effective implementation of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 is an urgent priority of the administration, for Secretary Chu, and for the Department of Energy. Congress has given the Department a great opportunity and a great responsibility to administer $32.7 billion in Recovery Act grant and contract authority, $6 billion in credit subsidy costs that will support tens of billions in new loan guarantees, and $6.5 billion in borrowing authority. Secretary Chu is personally committed to providing the direction, resources, and oversight needed to assure the timely but accountable distribution of this funding to support short-term needs and protect taxpayers while investing for the long term in a new economy powered by clean, reliable, affordable, and secure energy. When Secretary Chu asked me to serve as his senior advisor for Recovery Act implementation, he emphasized that we must deliver on 4 objectives. Get projects underway quickly, invest in projects with lasting value, exercise an unprecedented degree of transparency and oversight, and deliver a tangible down payment on the nation's energy and environmental future. We began the public part of this process last week with the Vice President's announcement of the first $8.1 billion for weatherization and state energy grant programs, and we will soon have additional funding announcements. These Recovery Act funds will create jobs and lay the groundwork for a less carbon-intensive, less oil-dependent, and cleaner energy economy. All of our efforts are geared toward meeting President Obama's pledge to act boldly and urgently to put Americans back to work by reinvesting in a new, clean energy economy. At the same time, we recognize that the Recovery Act programs will and should receive heightened public scrutiny, and so we are putting in place the leadership and control procedures necessary to track performance and account for expenditures. The Department of Energy is committed to carrying out the Economic Recovery Plan with the highest level of speed, discipline, transparency, and accountability. Under our Chief Financial Officer, Steve Isakowitz's leadership, the Department has taken significant steps to improve oversight and strengthen internal controls to ensure the funds are spent effectively. Every morning, the Recovery Act leadership principals from every program and every major function get together to ensure clear alignment on priorities, to report progress, and to resolve any outstanding issues that could impede success. We have developed strong oversight strategies for Recovery Act implementation, including upfront risk assessments, building specific risk management plans, upgrading process controls, establishing personal risk assurance accountabilities, and expanding outreach, training, and coordination between headquarters and field offices. As soon as the Recovery Act was passed, we conducted department-wide risk assessments to identify existing or potential vulnerabilities within our programs that could hinder our efforts to deliver on the Recovery Act. From these identified risks, senior management officials have begun developing risk mitigation plans to increase internal controls and reduce opportunities for fraud, waste, and abuse of recovery funds. For example, some programs have determined to use a phased approach to their distribution of funds. This will allow them to better maintain accountability by measuring performance against clear project milestones and dispersing new funds on the basis of successful performance. Several programs have also significantly expanded fraud training for their program managers and senior officials. In high-risk programs, such as the Office of Environmental Management, I have met personally or via phone and video conference with all of the site managers, major contractors, state regulators, and major unions to make clear the expectations up front for accountability, delivery, oversight, and transparency. As part of our planning and monitoring efforts, the Chief Financial Officer's Office of Program Analysis and Evaluation and the Office of Internal Review have taken steps to address internal controls guidance, document standards, external reporting requirements, outcome validation, and early issue identification. The Department has also taken several steps to ensure that all procurement vehicles incorporate a selection process that is fair, advances the President's long-term policy agenda. To ensure that all solicitations, contracts, and financial assistance awards comply with OMB's Recovery Act requirements, we have issued standard language for all these procurement instruments. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, at the Department of Energy, we are committed to creating jobs by developing new, innovative ways to provide clean, reliable, and secure energy. Congress has vested the Department with significant responsibility under the Recovery Act. We have begun and will continue to institute a culture of transparency, accountability, integrity, and efficiency as we capitalize on our advances in science and technology to better manage the nation's energy resources and contribute to a competitive, growing, and environmentally sustainable U.S. economy. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. This concludes my testimony, and I am happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. We will now begin our first round of questions, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. The idea of a stimulus package of stimulus spending is that it does not just help the immediate recipients, but it ripples through the economy, that whoever directly receives federal funds buys meat, the butcher buys bread, the baker buys candlesticks, the candlestick maker buys something else. And we obviously need that, since we've been losing 600,000 jobs a month, and we need it as quickly as we can. The two missions: spend money quickly and spend money well, carefully. How quickly do you think you can get the money out the door so the recipients can start buying meat and bread and candlesticks? Dr. Marrett, an approximate date when the money will start going out?
I indicated in my testimony that we are talking about a matter of weeks. That should be 2 or 3 weeks at the most, at that we will begin to move the money out of the door.
Okay. Mr. Spoehel?
The timing in NASA's case will depend on the length of the procurement cycles. The award of contracts that we have for the initial hurricane repair, for example, will likely take a month. So I would say it's probably at least 2 months before the actual work under any of those contracts would be undertaken. And that's, again, assuming that all the approvals and requisite reviews by OMB and Congress have been achieved.
Okay. Ms. Herbst?
The answer is dependent on the different bureaus, but for instance, in NTIA, we have DTV coupon money flowing again already. Approximately 2/3 of our monies we believe will go out as competitive grants and contracts. So we are in that process now of announcing grants and so forth.
Mr. Rogers?
In the Department of Energy, the first funds should be going out again in the next couple of weeks. The weatherization activities, we need to get a short form application from the states binding them under the Recovery Act terms, and then we're turning around and obligating the first 10% of the funds immediately to the states in response to that. Likewise, as soon as the obligations for the next departments come through, we'll be getting those monies out the door quickly as well.
Okay. Ms. Herbst, I understand that NIST had a construction competition last year. You got 100 applications. You only had the funding for 3. But I assume the others are still on the shelf. Were some of those also strong projects that would be logical, worthy recipients of funding?
The NIST spend plan is just about approved, and we recognize the flexibility we were given to award from both 2008 competition and 2009. So we're preserving that flexibility in our planning to move forward in that fashion.
So you will be able to fund some of those projects without rebidding them because you've already evaluated them, all the work has been done?
Well, we've been given the Act stipulated that we could do it that way, and we are certainly looking at that in our planning.
What would be the difference in timing if you took the plans already evaluated on the shelf versus rebidding, going back through all the rigmarole? All the oversight.
If I could, can I get back to you with that so I can give you a very specific answer on that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Marrett, I hear from the universities, the research universities in my district, that the researchers love working with FastLane. They hate working with grants.gov. This all comes at an awkward time. Is there anything you can do to have this subject to FastLane so it can remain up and running and let the bugs in grants.gov be worked out later?
Well, we certainly will be processing our own. We will continue to use FastLane. We do work with a number of other agencies with reference to FastLane and have been in discussion recently. There will be some limits, of course, to how much we will be able to absorb from everywhere across the federal government, but we are in conversation about how to have our own processes and what would be available, how to make that as widely available as possible.
Okay. Dr. Merritt, I also hear from researchers in my district that although the grants usually ask who will be doing this work, how many graduate assistants will you be using or whatever else, it is not typically, their work is not typically judged by how many jobs it creates. And they're a little puzzled by how all that is going to work and how they are supposed to report back on job creation from grants. What kind of guidance will they get from OMB, or are you getting from OMB to tell the research agencies what to tell universities on job creation data, how to keep it, what to look for?
The guidance is emerging from OMB, and we're in conversation with all of the agencies. But in addition, our grantees have always reported what they are doing, how many people they are anticipating, and in their subsequent reports, how many people they have in fact employed. So some of this will not be new for gathering the information. When I said about the numbers of students, postdocs, undergraduates and graduate students, postdoctoral students, for the programs that we have in the education world that talk about teachers, we have for some time been monitoring the numbers that we're talking about. We will have additional procedures where this will have to be reported as a part of the activities for any grant that's given.
I guess this is for all the panelists. So is there going to be a consistent policy across all agencies on how that data is going to be collected? What will be required? Just flip a coin.
All the agencies who receive funding are working with and through OMB, who's coordinating the guidance on jobs creation, counting methodology, tracking methodology, and reporting methodology.
And we're working, trying to, the Office of Science within the Department of Energy is trying to work quite closely with the National Science Foundation to make sure that the processes are similar across the various agencies. Because what you don't want to have is to have different researchers think one money group is different from another money group, either because the reporting is different or the application is different. So we're trying to get consistency between and among the agencies on that basis.
Okay. My time has expired, not gloriously, but some. Dr. Brown? I'll now recognize Dr. Brown for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First question would be to Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the Secretary was here, appeared before this whole committee, and during the questioning, I asked the Secretary if he realized that there was not a consensus, I repeat, not a consensus on human-induced global warming. And he disagreed with me on that. He talked about that if a scientist came forward and refuted the consensus, that individual would be counted a hero. Well, there are 1,000 such scientists around this country, around this world, that refute that there's any human-induced, if any, at the most, a very minuscule effect on human-induced global warming. I'm very concerned about the granting process and the accountability that you guys are going to be doing when the Secretary displays such blatant scientific blindness. There are many scientists all over this country, all over the world, that will very readily say that human-induced global warming is not factual. And so if you guys go forward in the granting process, taking the attitude that this is absolutely consensus, that this is absolutely a fact, and don't do any grants, don't do anything to look at the other side. First thing, it's not scientifically, there's no scientific integrity there. And I see a tremendous lack of that in the attitude of the Secretary. As you go forward with this granting process, I hope and pray that you will take into consideration that there are other views than the Secretary has, and will look at granting some of this money to other people. Would you please reassure me, because I have no assurance today that that's going to happen. I see what is happening with this administration and with your Secretary, and I hope it stops there, but within your agency, this tremendous scientific blindness about other ideas. Can you please tell me how you're going to ensure me as a member of Congress and the American people who are watching you this moment, how we're going to make sure that science prevails and not political policy that's being driven by other things than scientific methods. And before you answer that question, I want to tell you, I'm a physician. I believe in scientific theory. I believe totally in scientific integrity, and I do not see that with your Secretary.
So one of the things that's helpful about the Recovery Act is it actually specifies the blocks of that spending quite clearly, and my task is very straightforward in that regard, which is we need to move those funds out against those projects with a high degree of transparency and accountability. What is good about it is if you take a look at the funds we have, for example, for grant programs, of the $32.7 billion that we have for grants and contracts, approximately $13 billion of that is dedicated towards energy efficiency. I would argue, and we would argue, that those are among the highest return investment opportunities that the American public has, and that we're working closely with the Council of Economic Advisors to show what the return on the American taxpayers' investment is in energy efficiency programs. These are programs that should put dollars back in the pockets of hard-working Americans and demonstrate that a good investment in energy efficiency is a high-return one for the overall U.S. economy. So in those kind of topics, I don't think the issue is about global warming or not. It's just a good investment for the American people to make. In terms of the scientific question, what I think is we are driving towards, and as we get the grant programs defined for, say, the Office of Fossil Energy or the Office of Electricity, is what we're trying to do is create a series of experiments at scale against a broad range of technologies that address the particular topics that were brought up in the Recovery Act. And by examining a diverse range of technologies, what we then do is give the market the opportunity to decide what mix of capital cost, operating cost, and efficiency is the most appropriate one to be adopted by industry. And so I think it creates quite a good dynamic where you do the good science across a broad range and then effectively leave it up to the market to decide on adoption rates and adoption standards. So those are the approaches that we're taking. We should approach this with each of the different programs as they come out and explore whether, in fact, we are meeting that test.
Well, thank you, sir. My time has expired, and I thank the Chairman, but you still don't reassure me, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Ms. Dowkemper for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to ask you a few questions. I'm a new member from Pennsylvania, and it's great to be on this type of a committee because people in my district expect when I vote for something as important as this Recovery Act that we know where the money goes and we have transparency. Obviously, there's a lot of anger about money that's been given out. So this is very, very important to me and to my constituents. I want to ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how prepared do you believe you are currently to really be the stewards of this money? And my goal is that you're at a 10 eventually if you're not there, and how do you plan to get there if you're not?
I'm glad you let us know what the scale was on. It was getting ready to put us down near 1, thinking that was at the top. But if 10 is where we're aiming for, it would depend on which parts. We certainly, as I indicated, have the commitment. We've got plans. There are still some matters that we are working on to ensure that everything is going to be in place. And so I would not want to say that we have reached 10 as of today. I will guarantee we will be at 10 before that time period I had given you of when the funds will go out of the door. So that is what we're aiming towards. And I think we're quite well on the way to being exactly at the point you're talking about.
Thank you. Mr. Spoehel?
I think the processes and structures that NASA has in place would allow the agency to meet the requirements as they are known under the Recovery Act. There's guidance, as was mentioned before, is evolving, so it's hard to know until that solidifies exactly what readiness state we're in, but I believe we're ready.
Ms. Herbst?
For the Department of Commerce, I would echo that we're following the guidance closely. We have plans in place. We have created a risk inventory and are looking at risk mitigation plans. The area that we are working on right now are staffing up, particularly in the contracts and grants professional area. We have identified the resources we need, and we are working expeditiously to obtain those resources.
I think as Dr. Marrett was arguing, different programs are at different places in this process. Our commitment to you is that we are going to have the program to a high level of preparedness before the funds go out. What we did were two things. First is we established this risk assessment for each of the programs, and then are having each of the programs develop risk mitigation plans against the major risk areas that they have. Until those risk plans are in place, and until we've walked through a series of quite disciplined milestones, none of the money can be obligated or no checks can go out. And so that is the combination between my office and the CFO's office to make sure that each of them has to certify readiness before the first check clears. And again, each of the programs are at different places, but all will be ready before the money moves.
I have another question that I'd like to kind of address to the entire panel. Different areas of this country are having greater economic issues than other areas. Where I'm from, the northwest part of Pennsylvania, we had a depressed economy before the rest of the nation was really suffering as they are right now. When you're looking at the monies and granting this money out, are you taking into consideration at all what areas of the country have the greatest needs for jobs, for job creation, for economic development?
As I indicated, we have proposals in place, and proposals will be coming in. And we certainly, for National Science Foundation, we have to rely a lot on what comes to us. But one of the things that we did quite recently was to map across the country where the current proposals that could be considered under the Recovery Act, where those are located, to try to make sure that when we talk about trying to have broader impacts, we mean broader impacts, making sure that we're addressing the needs as those might vary across the country. So we are paying close attention to the quality of the work that's coming to us and the fact that that work is, in fact, represented across all parts of the nation.
Would anyone else like to address that?
Within the Department of Energy, every dollar under the Recovery Act is associated with a jobs amount, a state, and an impact, and then a set of milestones that that project has to achieve in order to reach those jobs and that impact. And so what's nice now is that we're going to be able to report out by state, which you can see with the existing formula grants, and then by congressional district, to be able to show the American people where those funds are going so that you can see that those dollars are in fact going to work in your neighborhoods. The good thing, again, about the Department of Energy's formula grant activities is both for the state levels and then as we come out with the energy efficiency activities for the local levels, we're going to be addressing every state in the country, and we're going to be addressing 1,700 municipalities with direct funds. And then, as with Dr. Marrett, there's a whole set of them that are coming in then from the marketplace. But the ability to go back and track jobs by congressional district is a really important one so that you can see where those monies are being spent.
I don't know, Ms. Herbst, did you want to comment at all?
I would echo Mr. Rogers in terms of, in addition to the criteria around specific program outcomes that our grant-making process already has, excuse me, the jobs creation criteria is being added, and we will track where those jobs are. Additionally, in commerce, we have the Economic Development Administration, and specifically have been directed to look at regions that have experienced economic dislocation and job loss as part of the grant-making criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dalkemper. For information to the members of the committee, I will, when I exceed the time, I will generally use that as a rule of thumb of how indulgent I will be for other members. So both Dr. Brown and Ms. Dalkemper exceeded their time, but not by as much as I exceeded my time. Mr. Bilbray, for roughly 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the spirit of full disclosure, Mr. Chairman, I serve as a ranking member for the Government Oversight Committee on Procurement and Government Oversight, so this is sort of a twofer for me. But I want to clarify that I think that what has happened this week with AIG is exactly why somebody like myself, who's been in government oversight since 1976, it's kind of scary to think I got elected to the city council before Jimmy Carter was elected. That's how long I've been in the game. In fact, that was the days when I had a mustache and long hair to my, okay. But the one thing I saw when the bailout under Bush was being proposed was it was wide open for this kind of abuse. Now, the discussion of this bill was the fact that we had a bill dropped at 10 minutes till midnight, and we were asked to start intelligent debate at 9 o'clock the next morning. And I just think that we got to recognize the huge potential for abuse because of the lack of oversight in the creation. And that means now the huge responsibility we have to really look at oversight in the implementation. So we've got to make up for that. And you think the people are upset right now about AIG, they're darn well going to be upset about this if we don't try to correct it. And the one thing I've tried to do working with my Democratic colleagues on oversight is to use the opportunity that this is a new administration with a whole new structure and help this new administration avoid the pitfalls of the previous administration. So rather than play gotcha the way that oversight usually does, we need to be proactive and point out the mistakes of the Bush and the Clinton administration so that the Obama administration doesn't fall into the same problem. So just so you know where I'm coming from and where we're working over on that committee, and there are a lot of information that I've received there that I will apply here. Mr. Rogers, we can argue the merits of what my scientists at Scripps say, and we're going, and different scientists are saying wherever. But there are some scientific facts that we've ignored in the past. Good example is your choice of the term green or renewable. And let me tell you, when you've got Duke University that just came out with a report that said it would be better never to plant the crop than to grow corn for ethanol. Better for the CO, better for the environment, across the board. I certainly hope that when we're reviewing applications that we remember that. When you have the Air Resources Board of California, which I had the privilege of serving on for 6 years, the premier clean air people, wouldn't you admit that they are cutting edge when it comes to emissions issues? When the ARB, the Air Resources Board of California, which there is a slew of states do nothing but follow their guideline, actually adopt their guideline, and let's face it, most people don't like following California anywhere except to the Hollywood. When they say that ethanol is no better for the environment than regular gasoline. In other words, the word is getting out from the scientists that the only thing green about burning ethanol is how much money the industry is making off of the consumer. Are you going to be able to reflect, as you look at this, that when you talk about a gallon, you don't talk about a gallon for gallon like what we get with ethanol, where you lose 30%, but mile for mile, BT to BTU, the outcome and the efficiency, not what people are telling you, but what's clean and what gives you the mileage. Are you able to reflect that?
In the program evaluation, for example, of some of the auto loan programs, as a simple one, we have the Argonne National Labs has done a very nice set of technical analysis that reflects a multitude of real-world functions in terms of the operations in that evaluation. So, how do people really drive cars as a simple model, as well as issues like the ones that you raise. And I think that's where what the department can bring to this debate again is good scientific evaluation that incorporates all the different factors in a consistent fashion as we go through program evaluation.
Okay, because E85, to give a credit to E85 and not give a credit to natural gas, compressed gas, even to have E85 in the same category is really ignoring good science. And I know the politics the way it is, and I know where the president's from and all his buddies, but the fact is this is one of those things I'm going to be pounding on, because just as much as we need to stand up for good science about climate change is where the answer is. Now, we're going to be using nonprofits a lot on this. And one of the things we've run into, and Ms. Herbst, we've run into this issue, everybody's talking about the previous administration's contracts with for-profit organizations in Iraq. The new big scandal is going to be what the Bush administration did with so-called nonprofits and the lack of accountability for those contracts in Afghanistan. Mr. Rogers, are we going to maintain a level of oversight on nonprofits? Because when we do energy retrofits, you know that's very, very cost effective. But traditionally, nonprofits have jumped into that. But the oversight and the accountability of nonprofits have never, ever been up to the standards that we've held with for-profits. Are we ready to change that and hold them to the same standard just because they're so-called community-based? Are they going to be required to hold the same standards that we do for profit?
So one of the most important improvements in oversight that we're implementing as part of the Recovery Act is a change in the way that we look at the weatherization program. Historically, the money flows through the states, and we would look at the state level to figure out how the state is actually costing or spending those funds. And we would do that every other year with the states. Under the current model, what we're doing is moving to a much more direct oversight model where first the states have to issue plans and milestones. They only get funding with respect to meeting their milestone objectives. Secondly, we're going to be auditing not just the funds flow, but actually the outcomes from the way the states are spending the funds. So the states now have to report within 5 business days of the close of every month who receives the checks from the states, which nonprofits receive that. And instead of us going in and just saying, can you show us that a nonprofit did how many houses, we actually now have the ability to go in and look at which houses actually got done and go to the house and figure out, was it done, to what standard, did they do it against, how much money did they spend, what kind of returns did they get for that investment, which is something that we haven't had either the resources or the authority to do in the past.
Mrs. Herbst, following up on this, just to get down to it, is that one of the critical components of distributing these funds was the census of what's population based. And we're talking about, let me just follow up with this one, please. This is a very important issue in California, and that is the scientific accurate data that we need for our census is going to be under your department. We've got talk of the use of Acorn, one of those nonprofits that are under investigation in California. The criminal investigation is as long as my arm. And to talk about a nonprofit that is under investigation, that is under that kind of cloud, really lends itself to the kind of outrage that we said that private sectors do, being investigated the same way. Are we going to be contracting with nonprofits that have that cloud? And if we are, doesn't that send a whole message that the entire census, if we use those groups, may be suspect down the road when it's critical time to be able to try to use that data?
I'm sorry. Ms. Herbst, Mr. Bilbray has now exceeded his time by substantially more than I exceeded my time. So if you could make your answer just a sentence or two, and you can respond further in writing if you like.
Thank you. Because I would like to respond in detail as a follow-up. We are committed to the importance and the accuracy of the census. The Census Partnership Program Plan, which is part of the communication plan, is under review regularly, and the spending on that is under review, and we intend to continue that. We also intend to have the same oversight, regardless of whether it's a profit or nonprofit. All of our processes around acquisitions and grants do not distinguish between those two. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now recognize myself for a second round of questioning. I understand with votes coming, it probably will not be the case that members other than Mr. Brown and I will be able to have a second round. But Dr. Marrett, your agency is getting a $3 billion increase over 2 years. You are now a $6 billion agency, so that's a pretty stiff increase. Our staff has heard that many of your employees, most of your employees are working hard already, and most are in fact working well beyond an 8-hour day. How is your staff going to manage that really very significant increase in work to make sure that the money is managed properly?
our staff we have to acknowledge that there are pressures on the foundation given that the staffing levels have not been increasing. Against that backdrop, though, there's a great deal of enthusiasm on the part of all the staff. The level of commitment is amazing. In addition, the workload is not going to be even across the foundation, and so some will have more than others, and thus we're looking at how to even out a lot more the workload issues. So we're working on that. The other matter has to do with something that I think is affecting all of us. The Office of Personnel Management is also looking at strategies that might be put into place that will help with the staffing issues that we're all confronting at this time. So we are paying a lot of attention to what kinds of flexibilities we have internally, what kinds of strategies might be possible through the experiences elsewhere, and certainly working to make sure that we do not place great stresses on what is still a very enthusiastic staff.
Thank you, Dr. Marrett. Mr. Spoehel, my concerns about NASA are different. You make the point correctly that the increase for NASA is not really that much more than your current budget, and that you can simply supervise this funding in the way that you supervise your existing funding. I think it's a $1 billion increase in a $17 billion budget. The problem is your existing management. NASA has consistently remained on GAO's list of the agency that's at highest risk for mismanagement in contract administration, at risk for waste, fraud, and abuse. This committee is now looking at various acquisition contracts by NASA, contracts generally at how NASA administers contracts and decides what to contract. We are not entirely reassured by the assertion that you'll just manage this the way you're managing everything else. What changes does NASA? You're at kind of a juncture where you can make changes. You will shortly have a new director. We devoutly hope you will have a new IG. What changes do you contemplate making in NASA's management of contracts now?
Over a year ago, in response to the continued portrayal of NASA as on the high-risk list, NASA undertook a comprehensive corrective action plan. Based on the progress under that, as may have been noted, GAO improved and recognized the improvement that NASA had made under the high-risk series. NASA continues to undertake additional actions under that, and I'd be glad to provide the committee with a copy of that if that's something that we'd like to go into in more detail.
Okay. Ms. Herbst, the IMPOS satellite has been one of this committee's, the subcommittees and the broader committee's concerns for the last several years, and we've heard again and again that the project has been mismanaged, and the mismanagement has cost taxpayers considerably, and that we are at some risk by not having the system in place to collect climate change data and weather prediction data to improve our weather prediction capability. Have you developed a plan to use some of the Recovery Act funds to address the many problems with the IMPOS system?
NOAA is very focused on program execution, particularly in this program, and is planning on using Recovery Act funds towards that program to reduce technical and schedule risk. And again, their spend plans are working their way through the approval process in the department. We expect to have them out shortly, and that will include the plan around the NEPA satellite.
My time has expired by just a little bit. Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm always going to give you leeway because I may need it at sometimes myself. And you have the gavel, correct. I'm sure you'll remind me that over and over again. I want to start with Ms. Herbst, but I'd like all of you to answer this question. I want to associate myself with the concerns and remarks that my colleague, Mr. Bilbray, said. Ms. Herbst, would you please reassure me, this committee, and the American people that y'all will not be granting any of these funds to profits or nonprofits, either one, to any group that's under criminal investigation for whatever reason, and that you'll take diligent efforts to make sure that that happens. I think it's atrocious, totally unacceptable the way that the original TARP funds were handled by the Bush administration. And I think it's extremely important for this administration to make sure that those funds are expended in a better way. And one way to do that is to assure us as a committee, assure the American people that groups such as ACORN, which are under investigation in numerous states, it's not just one little enclave of these folks, it's a systemic problem with ACORN. But would you please reassure us that you will take very diligent efforts to ensure that taxpayers' dollars are not going to be given to groups that are under criminal investigation, particularly those that are under investigations for fraud? And then I'd like all the rest of you to answer that if we still have time within my 5 minutes.
The Department of Commerce has identified the contracts and grants area in total across all of our bureaus as a key area of risk to mitigate and manage, and we've spent additional time with our senior people developing risk management and oversight plans, providing additional guidance. We also plan from a personnel standpoint to put our senior experienced contracts and grants people on Recovery Act contracts and grants because of the additional oversight, the additional reporting and accountability requirements. We feel we need to put our most experienced people on those. We intend to then bring in other resources to handle, through our normal processes and oversight, the existing underlying grants and contracts activity. We have also taken a specific look at our Investment Review Board procedures and processes, which are used at the department level to review high-level, high-risk, high-dollar types of contracts, grants, and programs. And we're putting special emphasis on Recovery Act grants and contracts for the review board. We will be very diligent in reviewing those grants and contract awards, and we'll use all of the oversight and management processes that we have to ensure that.
Well, I'm about to run out of time, and I would like for the other three of you to please answer that in writing. We're going to present, I think, questions in writing, so if y'all would please answer that question. But back to Ms. Herbst before my time runs out. Would you assure me that you're not going to give grants to ACORN to do census?
I'd like to be able to get back to you. I'd like to go back to the department and give you an answer in very great detail on that, if I may.
Well, if you don't have that answer, certainly I'll be glad to give you that latitude, but I highly encourage, just for the sake of integrity of the census, which is extremely important to every single American. Most of them don't realize how important that is. But this organization is under criminal investigation in numerous states across this country. And I highly recommend that the agency absolutely not even begin to consider granting ACORN any money whatsoever to be involved in the census. And I encourage all of y'all's agencies to take diligent efforts to make sure that no contracts are given to anybody, profit or nonprofit, that is under criminal investigation, because it's going to lay a cloud on this administration, on this Congress, on everything that's done. So I encourage y'all to do so. There is a database that y'all can search. It's not updated enough. That's a whole nother issue, but I encourage you to do that. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Herbst. I actually hold the 435th seat in Congress, so I thought the Census Bureau did an outstanding job last time. The members from Utah, not so much. It turns out we do have time for another round of questioning. Ms. Dowkamp, if you have an additional round of questioning, if not, it probably makes sense for us to stand at ease and go to vote and have the next panel. Do you have a second round?
I just have one question that should be fairly easy to hopefully to answer. But it is about my question is about other agencies. Where desired or where needed, have you been getting the necessary support? And if not, can we do anything to help you with that? Because, I find that agencies often don't cooperate as we really would hope that they would here in the federal government.
Well, speaking on behalf of NSF, there's been quite a bit of interaction across the agencies. You've heard some of that among us today, but there are other agencies that we are working with, especially to learn about what are potential effective practices to ensure that there are commonalities. I can't think of then any particular problems that I would say we have encountered in working with the other agencies.
Indeed, from an Energy Department standpoint, the level of collaboration among departments has been at a very, very high level. We have joint ventures now with HUD and with HHS on community grant activities, with Interior and Agriculture on a whole set of siting issues, with labor and education on job training issues, so that we actually are getting the most for the taxpayers' funds, that we are either not leaving big gaps or showing up in duplicative ways. And the level of commitment to collaboration in a positive way from the American taxpayer has been extraordinary since the passage of the Recovery Act.
That's great to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bilbray. It looks like you will have time for a couple minutes as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rogers, we had a great ability to talk directly to the Energy Secretary. Energy Secretary made it very clear that he understands that the answer for clean fuel is a petroleum-like product with the BTUs, clean environment, and that alcohol, ethanol, is not the answer. Is your department ready to draw the line and make sure you're not using taxpayers' funds to subsidize technology that produces a fuel that is not recognized by the best experts as a clean fuel, i.e. ethanol?
The funding within the Recovery Act focused on renewables is still going through the consideration process, and we're still working with the Office of Management and Budget to be able to talk exactly about how that breaks down. We should have a very clear set of guidance out on that in the next several weeks where we can address that issue specifically.
Mr. Rogers, were you around in the 90s when the federal government mandated the inclusion of MTBE, aka methanol, in our gasoline stream in non-attainment areas?
I've been around the federal government for 30 days, so I was not here in the 1990s.
Well, let me just remind you, as the fact is the federal government has gone down roads before thinking it's an environmental option, not taking the time to talk to the scientists, and creating not only a huge waste of taxpayers' money, but huge environmental damage. Santa Monica now still has polluted wells from a federally mandated additive that was supposedly, and I just want to say again, I don't care if it's even cellulosic. The Secretary made it quite clear in his hearing that he is looking for an option that produces a fuel that is not 30% less efficient than traditional fossil fuels and does not create more pollution per mile. And watch the way they work their numbers. They'll say per gallon, and they'll say tailpipe emissions. They won't talk total emissions. And if I sound really hard-nosed about this, is that we've had to live with the environmental damage of a misguided federal strategy. And if you want to see a scandal like AIG, in a few years, a few months, we could have all this new science coming out on ethanol, and your department subsidizing it, and I don't think you want to be in that position. So I hope you look at these things, the apples and oranges, mile for mile, not gallon for gallon, and emissions at a truly environmental item. Can we do that?
The Secretary's guidance on this topic is quite clear, and what's good about working for the Secretary as he sinks his teeth into a set of topics and gets into the science in great detail. And then that translates quite quickly into the structure of the both of the direct operations that we have as well as of the grant making that we undertake. And so as we work through this process, he is directly involved in that activity.
Well, I think what I'm excited is I've got a Californian who knows the frustration of us in California watching Washington do things in the name of the environment that has been absolutely disastrous. And now we finally got somebody at the right place who can sort of try to wake up this town that there are environmental opportunities out there, and there are some really lost leaders. And I'm still very excited about somebody trying to show me how you're going to make coal clean from the mining to the transporting to the use. And I'll still stand up and say clean coal is about as logical as safe cigarettes. And in few years, people are going to understand that. But this one, I really do not want us to waste this money. I don't want the outrage with this administration that we've seen with the last administration. And we can avoid this if we just willing to take the time to make sure we got our facts straight first. And I don't care if it's the technology we choose or the people we choose to implement this funds. We darn well better be careful, because what Congress was not careful. We did not take the time, and you've got to make sure you take the time and do it right, because we didn't do it right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think it now makes, we've now completed with this panel. It does appear we might have time to get started on the second panel, at least perhaps to do the introduction. So if we could fairly quickly change places. But we will shortly be called for votes.
A minute, we may.
Well, we've at least. I think we do have time at least to get into the introduction of the of our panel. I would like to introduce our second panel. Mr. Gregory Friedman is the Inspector General for the United States Department of Energy. Mr. Todd Zinser is the Inspector General for the U.S. Department of Commerce. Mr. Tim Cross is the Interim Inspector General at the National Science Foundation. Ms. Eileen Norcross is a Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center, a think tank at George Mason University. And Ms. Patricia Dalton is the Managing Director of the Natural Resources and Environmental Division at the U.S. Governmental Accountability Office. As you know from having been here for the previous witnesses, you each have 5 minutes for your oral testimony. Your written testimony is as long as you would like it for it to be, within reasonable limits. And that will be submitted to the record. After your oral testimony. We'll have rounds of questioning, perhaps just one, in which each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. It is a practice of the subcommittee to receive testimony under oath. Do any of you have any objection to swearing an oath, to taking an oath? Okay. You also have the right to be represented by counsel. Do any of you have counsel here? If you now all please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing? Excuse me. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Okay. Let the record reflect that each of the witnesses swore the oath. Should we get Friedman, do you think?
I think we've got enough time to get him.
Mr. Friedman, I think we have time to take your testimony.
Certainly. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on accountability and transparency issues related to the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. As you know, the Department of Energy will receive approximately $40 billion for various science, energy, and environmental programs and initiatives. Furthermore, based on the Recovery Act and previously approved programs, the Department has been authorized to make or guarantee loans totaling up to $127 billion for innovative technologies as well as auto industry advancements. The Recovery Act will undoubtedly have a significant impact on the operations and the activities of the Department and, in turn, on the Office of Inspector General. The passage of this legislation makes this a transformative time for the Department of Energy, particularly in the areas of scientific discovery and innovation. My staff and I are committed to evaluating the actions of the Department to ensure that Recovery Act funds are used both efficiently and effectively. Utilizing a risk-based oversight strategy, my office will first evaluate the internal control structure for the most significant programs receiving Recovery Act funds. Second, through transaction testing, evaluate the effectiveness of the Department's distribution of funds to key external recipients. Third, evaluate Department metrics to gauge program success. Fourth, provide fraud awareness briefings throughout the Department complex and coordinate with federal, state, and local prosecutors and law enforcement agencies. And fifth, enhance our program to process and report on whistleblower retaliation complaints. In addition, the Act creates the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board. As Inspector General for the Department of Energy, I will participate actively as a member of this board. This strategy takes into account management challenges that we have reported on over time, as well as issues that we expect as a result of new initiatives related to the Recovery Act. These include concerns about the following: the Department's ability to administer or manage its large portfolio of contracts and related financial instruments, the Department's loan guarantee program, specifically related to having adequate staffing to manage the programs, and the inherent vulnerabilities and operational risks associated with massive increases in funding and mission responsibilities, all in a relatively short time frame. We will treat these concerns as priorities as we move forward. While continuing to focus attention on our customary responsibilities, in recent weeks my office has accelerated efforts to provide proactive oversight of Recovery Act funds and programs. In addition to developing our oversight strategy, my office will shortly issue 2 reports to the Department regarding the Department's implementation of the Act. First, we will provide the Department with a report on lessons learned based on prior Office of Inspector General work. This report will provide the Department, we hope, with a resource to establish a framework to manage the unprecedented amount of funding under the legislation. Secondly, we will provide a report on staffing concerns relating to the Department's acquisition workforce and their impact on the implementation of the Recovery Act. Using our risk-based approach, my office has also initiated a review of the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. This office will be one of the first to put money on the street as a result of the Recovery Act. Furthermore, to mitigate potential fraud risks, my office has launched a proactive effort to communicate with federal and state prosecutors on strategy for pursuing allegations of fraud. And we have also delivered over 15 fraud awareness briefings to various department elements. Finally, in order to make the most effective use of available oversight resources, my office is currently involved in discussions with several state auditors to establish collaborative efforts, most notably in the area of weatherization, to follow the expenditure of Recovery Act funds to project completion. We have also commenced outreach efforts with the Government Accountability Office to discuss interaction and communication as it relates to the Recovery Act. We appreciate the significance of the Department of Energy's participation in the Recovery Act, and the potential short and long-term implications for the U.S. economy. We are mindful as well of the special responsibilities of the Office of Inspector General to help ensure transparency and accountability, all in the interest of the American taxpayers. We will work diligently to meet these challenges. We look forward to keeping this subcommittee and others in Congress apprised of the results of our work. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'd be pleased to answer any questions that the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown and I need to go vote now, but we have 3 votes. We should be back within half an hour. And when we return, Mr. Zinser, you will be first up. So we are now at ease. Okay, we are back. Mr. Zinser for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Brown. Thank you for inviting us to testify today on the oversight of the science programs and initiatives at the Department of Commerce that will be funded through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. The Recovery Act requires unprecedented accountability and transparency on the part of government agencies receiving stimulus funds and establishes a strong oversight role for offices of Inspector General. The Department of Commerce received approximately $7.9 billion in stimulus funding. $1.4 billion of this amount is for science activities at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The Department has assigned some of its very best people to lead its Recovery Act efforts, and we have found that all those involved are committed to meeting the challenges ahead. Nonetheless, spending stimulus funds effectively poses significant risks and challenges for the Department of Commerce. At the outset, we see 6 areas of risk facing the Department in spending Recovery Act funds. First, spending these funds expeditiously with little time to staff up and gear operations to accommodate the additional activities significantly increases the risks for fraud and waste in stimulus-funded initiatives, as well as in the Department's traditionally funded operations. Second, the executive branch, including the Department of Commerce, is still in transition. Key leadership positions remain unfilled. This puts at risk the leadership vision and decision-making important in executing a cohesive Recovery Act plan. Third, the Act's emphasis on grant and contract spending puts additional pressure on already overburdened management and administrative operations, particularly the Department's grants management and acquisition workforce. Fourth, construction grants and contracts, which NOAA and NIST are expressly required to fund, are inherently risky and difficult to manage effectively. In addition, the construction grant program to be administered by NIST is a relatively new program. 5 is specific requirements related to competitive contracts, such as maximizing the use of fixed-price contracts, and the Act's Buy American requirements will require extra vigilance. And finally, the Act's strict oversight requirements and reporting deadlines will require a greater level of centralized management of the bureaus than the Department has historically exercised. This is a significant challenge for the Department because it has been expected to exercise a greater centralized management role without sufficient funding to do so in the past and without funding to do so in the Recovery Act. Mr. Chairman, my written statement includes examples of audits and investigations of grants and contracts where we have found problems. My written statement also includes examples of important actions the Department is taking to strengthen its administration of grants and contracts. And you heard from Ellen Herbst on your first panel this morning about steps the Department is taking specifically for the Recovery Act. The Office of Inspector General has established a Recovery Act task force. We are also participating in the Department Steering Committee in an advisory capacity to reinforce the recommendations we have made on our past audit work. We are scheduling fraud awareness briefings by our investigative staff and technical assistance briefings by our audit staff. We have hired a risk management expert to lead our task force and have organized along 8 subject matter areas: transparency and accountability, grants, program acquisition and construction, scientific and technical research, the broadband technology program, census, digital TV, and fraud awareness. Our early work with the department and its bureaus is aimed at the prevention of fraud, waste, and abuse, and reinforcing the notion that the program offices themselves have the most critical role in providing oversight of the projects and contracts they fund. With additional oversight funding we have received, we will not be able to audit every contract and grant. We will need to target our resources to those projects and grants that present the greatest risk. We would like to commend the subcommittee for holding this hearing early in the process and focusing attention on the importance of oversight in the science programs funded by the Recovery Act. We would welcome the opportunity to assist the subcommittee with your oversight work however we can. That concludes my statement, Mr. Chairman. I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Zinser. Mr. Cross for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Miller. Good afternoon, Ranking Member Brown and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about how the NSF Office of Inspector General will perform its oversight responsibilities under the Recovery Act. I'd like to discuss 3 subjects with you today. First, the OIG's plan for monitoring NSF recovery spending. Second, important challenges facing NSF with regard to the Recovery Act. And finally, how my office will be addressing our current staffing needs. We will pursue a strategy aimed not only at safeguarding Recovery Act funds against waste, fraud, and abuse, but also at helping assess whether those funds produce the results sought in the Act. We will develop an implementation plan for our Recovery Act oversight that includes preparing a thorough risk analysis, reviewing past OIG audit and investigative findings that may be relevant, contracting for audits and other reviews of the agency's financial accounting systems, conducting focused reviews of the agency's actions to implement its spending and risk management plans, and initiating detailed audits and proactive investigation reviews to identify and evaluate issues flagged in our risk assessments. We have also launched an outreach effort aimed at both agency program managers and the public about OIG's role under the Recovery Act, and this also helps us gather information and insights that are useful in determining the issues on which we need to focus. Given our independent oversight role, we cannot participate in agency decision-making, but our input at this juncture may help NSF avoid problems down the road. Like other IG offices, we prepare a list each year of what we consider the most significant challenges facing agency management. There are several challenges that have particular relevance to the administration of the Recovery Act. Previous reviews have identified the major research, equipment, and facilities construction expenditures, and NSF's monitoring of previously made awards as high-risk activities. Actions that NSF has taken in recent years in response to past OIG recommendations have mitigated some of the problems that we identified. However, we still consider both as high-risk areas for purposes of the Recovery Act because of the large amounts of money at stake and the fact that a number of our recommendations remain unimplemented. We understand that NSF intends to use Recovery Act funds largely to support proposals that have already been submitted. It will be a challenge for NSF to implement the new requirements on awards that are based on earlier proposals, which most likely did not envision or address the purposes or additional reporting requirements of the Act. Another management challenge that raises concern is the adequacy of the NSF's workforce, as you heard earlier this morning. The administration of the Recovery Act funds represent a significant increase in NSF's workload over at least the next year and a half. We are concerned that the work involved in distributing and monitoring the results of the Recovery Act funding will severely strain NSF's grant processing operations, its staff, and its information systems across the agency. Further, a fundamental responsibility of my office is the promotion of research integrity. We devote significant investigative resources to both preventing and investigating research misconduct, and we are concerned that the large inflow of research dollars into an already highly competitive arena can only increase the opportunities for abuse. Finally, we will also be watchful of award recipients whose financial systems may have difficulty handling a sizable influx of funds. We have identified a number of specific grant characteristics as fraud indicators that, based on our experience, may reflect a higher potential for abuse, and we are sharing these indicators with NSF along with practical guidance on combating fraud. I was also asked by the subcommittee to comment on our own staffing resources. Because the funding we received in the Act is temporary, we probably will not be able to use stimulus funding to hire additional permanent employees. Instead, we are looking into options for the temporary hiring of auditors and investigators, and we expect to use the bulk of our Recovery Act funding to retain contractors to conduct audits and provide forensic support for investigations. We expect that the additional workload generated by the stimulus funds will be significant and extend beyond the funding period. We are considering some adjustments to our work methods, such as developing reviews that are shorter and more focused than traditional audits tend to be, in order to provide more timely results. Our challenge will be to continue to provide the robust audits and investigations necessary to address fraud, waste, and abuse issues occurring in NSF programs and activities, while also giving top priority to the special oversight requirements of the Recovery Act, and we look forward to meeting that challenge. Chairman Miller, that concludes my testimony. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Ms. Norcross for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on how citizens and non-governmental entities can help monitor stimulus spending. I am a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center, a university-based research center that works with scholars, policy experts, and government officials to connect academic learning with real-world practice. Part of that research focuses on using technology to improve government transparency, including the accessibility and usability of data for agencies, Congress, and citizens. First, I would like to submit to the record a paper my colleague Jerry Brito has written on crowdsourcing, one of the tools I will discuss today. The committee knows how vital accountability is to the performance of the nearly $800 billion committed in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. We are entering unsettling economic territory regardless of any potential short-term stimulus effect. We face a budget deficit of $1.75 trillion in 2009. That's 12.3% of GDP, the highest deficit as a share of the economy since World War II. Another effect of the recession and stimulus actions is the massive uncertainty it has created. Transparency is important for many reasons, including restoring credibility and certainty with the public. Following the money as it flows from agencies to states, localities, contractors, and grantees is a monumental, if not impossible, task for a centralized entity, no matter how many auditors and analysts government commits to the job. The administration noted why in its memo on transparency and open government. Knowledge is widely dispersed in society. Those in government charged with stimulus accountability are being asked to manage an unprecedented deluge of data. Funds are to be spent quickly while ensuring prudent management. Fortunately, that work can be augmented at a low cost. The public, technically skilled and knowledgeable parties in the online transparency community can help fill that gap, but only if government provides the data. The data must be deep, structured, and standardized. With data made publicly accessible, there are literally no limits to how individuals can extract patterns, trends, using Internet tools and applications. One such tool is crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing allows a large group of people to make small individual contributions to a project. Wikipedia, the online encyclopedia, is the most familiar example. Wikipedia is built on wikis, a kind of online collaborative notebook built by volunteers who add, edit, and enhance reference articles on any topic conceivable. The result is a dynamic resource more extensive and deep than what a limited number of editors could produce in a traditional organization. The Internet allows people to gather and analyze data in novel ways, to take apart impenetrable masses of data quickly to find patterns. This technique can be used to follow stimulus money. In fact, it is being used right now at stimuluswatch.org, a website I co-founded with Jerry Brito and 2 software developers, Kevin Dwyer and Peter Snyder. The premise of Stimulus Watch is simple. Using the U.S. Conference of Mayors online wish list for projects cities would like to fund with stimulus money, in a matter of weeks, the developers created a keyword searchable database, allowing users to search projects, comment and vote, and importantly, contribute wikis or factual information on projects. In effect, Stimulus Watch transformed a static online list into a virtual town hall. Since the launch in January, the response has been tremendous. In the first month, we had 2 million unique visitors and many journalists using the site. Projects deemed low priority rose to the top within hours. A few weeks after the site's launch, a local paper in Natchez, Mississippi, clarified that a nature trail listed at $600 million was only supposed to cost $3.1 million. An error had been made, but it had been caught because so many eyes were scanning the data. Other projects in transit and light rail quickly emerged as high priority, stimulating debate by local citizens. Many project descriptions were enhanced with factual information beyond what cities provided, in some cases clarifying what were initially viewed as wasteful projects. Stimulus Watch demonstrates how crowdsourcing can help monitor projects that are actually funded with stimulus dollars. But first, the public needs raw project-level data. Though Recovery.gov has promised accountability to citizens through reporting, the provisions of the Act are not encouraging. ARA's reporting requirements are shallow and incomplete. Only prime non-federal recipients and subawards made by prime recipients must be reported. The trail stops very high in the funding chain. Subrecipients need not report. In many cases, that means reporting stops at the level of a city. The granular project-level detail necessary for analysis and tracking may not be available. Secondly, ARA doesn't stipulate how data should be provided. There is no guarantee of complete data sets or structured formats such as XML. Why is this important? An example, it may be possible to account for stimulus spending in a narrative form and post it online. We may be left with millions of individual narratives, but it would be impossible to read them all and make sense of them. Putting this data in a structured format that can be used by developers can permit any number of possibilities for monitoring and measuring the stimulus impact and performance, meshing data with interactive maps, economic or industry statistics, and congressional districts. But short of project-level data provided in a structured format, the task at hand is not only an impossibility, but a wasted opportunity that will leave more questions about the efficacy of the stimulus unanswered and even greater uncertainty among the public. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Norcross. Ms. Dalton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, I'm pleased to be here today to discuss GAO's plans for carrying out our oversight roles related to science funding under the Recovery Act. Today I want to discuss those responsibilities and plans that we have underway to oversee these funds, as well as the risks in particular funding areas in R&D that deserve special attention to ensure that the funds are best used. The Recovery Act provides over $21 billion in additional spending at Energy Commerce, NSF, and NASA for research and development related activities. These range from fundamental research to demonstration projects to purchases of equipment and the building of new facilities. The accountability community will play an important role in reviewing the use of Recovery Act funds. In addition to GAO, the community includes the IGs, the state auditors, local government auditors, and the Recovery and Accountability and Transparency Board. Because of the scope of this work, we at GAO have reached out to the broader accountability community to coordinate our respective roles, planned approaches, and timelines. Through a coordinated approach, we feel that we can maximize our overall effectiveness. The Recovery Act directs GAO specifically to provide bi-monthly reviews and reporting on selected states and localities' use of funds. We have already begun the first review, which will examine 16 states, the District of Columbia, and selected localities. These states represent 65% of the U.S. population and approximately two-thirds of the money going through the state governments under the Recovery Act program. Our first report will be issued in about a month. Over the next few years, we will be able to provide an ongoing longitudinal analysis of the use of Recovery Act funds at the state and local level. We will look at other states as necessary. At the federal level, in consultation with the Congress and in coordination with the IGs, we will also be targeting at-risk programs for review. We will also incorporate reviews of stimulus funding in our ongoing reviews of base programs. In recent years, the accountability community has produced a wide variety of best practice and related guides in areas such as grant and contract management that can assist agencies in ensuring they have the needed internal controls in place from the outset. Upfront safeguards are critical to the successful program implementation. It's important to have the controls built in at the beginning so that we can hopefully prevent downstream problems. We at GAO are currently assessing programs for key risk factors. They include whether it's a new program under the Recovery Act, a significantly expanded program, there's a new delivery mechanism, or a program has known problems. A number of programs receiving science funding have one or more of these risk factors. For example, $6 billion is being provided for loan guarantees at the Department of Energy. As a significant expansion of a new program that has had some startup problems. At NASA, when we examined projects with life cycle costs exceeding $250 million, 10 out of the 13 projects had very serious implementation problems in terms of cost and budget and cost and schedule growth. In summary, to make the most effective and efficient use of resources, we will work together with the IGs to leverage our strengths and avoid duplication of effort wherever possible. We have moved quickly to begin our oversight work with our initial assessment of state funding currently underway, as well as our program risk assessment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. We will now have questions. I would anticipate one round. Do you have more than that?
No, that's fine. I know you have a committee
All right.
hearing that you need to go to, and that's fine.
Mr. Friedman and Mr. Zinser, the statute provides that the two of you sit on the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board. The board will meet for the first time on March 27th. What will you take to the board? What concerns, what recommendations?
Well, there are 10 IGs on the board, as you know, Mr. Chairman, and I think I, of course, am not the chair of the board. Mr. Earl Devaney, who's the former, who's the sitting IG, I guess, at the Department of Interior, but is temporarily in this capacity, will be chairing it. So I don't precisely know what the agenda will be for that date. My expectation is, number one, that we have a responsibility under the statute to operate recovery.gov, and that will probably consume a good deal of our time at that meeting. Secondly, I anticipate that we will be talking about the progress we've made in proactively providing oversight at our respective agencies and determining if there are cross-cutting issues that could be applied throughout the IG community, certainly, and throughout the accountability community in a broader context. So those are the three, and probably findings to date, you know, specific to our agencies, but which may have application again across the board. So I anticipate that will be the primary focus of the meeting, but I'm not setting the agenda, so I don't know for sure.
Mr. Zinser, any concerns or?
Yes, sir. I think there'll be a lot of issues surrounding technical problems with recovery.gov and reporting requirements on the agencies and how they're going to fulfill those reporting requirements. I also think that a cross-cutting issue both for the oversight groups as well as the agencies themselves, and it was discussed here several times this morning, is workforce issues about how we staff both the oversight agencies and the agencies that are spending these monies. Do we have the right people in the workforce to do that? Okay.
Mr. Cross, if I could bring you in too. So ask the question of the three IGs. I know that most of the witnesses, perhaps all the witnesses, have touched on whether agency contract and grant management resources are sufficient or really ready to manage the extra workload. Do you believe they are sufficient? Are they ready for what's coming at them? And if not, what needs to be done?
Well, I think at NSF, they are making strides in that direction. They didn't get any additional funding for workforce amelioration, so the workload is going to be there with essentially the same staff. Given that fact, you have to look for ways to make that productivity more efficient, and they are doing that in terms of beefing up their IT, doing some cross-training, bringing in more support staff, that kind of thing. Also looking at all the different possibilities with OPM for bringing people on a temporary basis. So I think that's the thrust. They still have some new territory to tread in terms of the reports and the information they need to generate, in terms of figuring out how to do undeclines, as they call them, where you're taking formally declined proposals and revisiting those for future funding. There are some new games at play here that people need to figure out, and I know they've got a lot of staff and managers looking at those issues, and we'll be watching to see how they work them.
Okay, Mr. Zinser, Mr. Friedman.
Well, I think at the Department of Commerce, it's mixed. I think some agencies are prepared for contracting, but perhaps not grants, and vice versa. I know, for example, that a broadband technology program is going to require an increase in grants management personnel, and the agency or the department has three different agencies that administer grants, and I don't think they've settled on what agency is going to administer the grants under the broadband program. That's just one example, but whoever does is going to have to increase that workforce substantially.
It's a superb question, Mr. Chairman, and obviously it's one of the biggest problems we feel the Department of Energy faces. As you may be aware, the Department of Energy perhaps is the most contractor-dependent agency in the civilian sector. Virtually everything is done by contract, grant, cooperative agreement, whole series of contractual and financial instruments. And actually, we wrote to the Deputy Secretary expressing our concern in 2007, and we've just updated that. We'll be issuing a report on that subject in the not-too-distant future. They have made some progress, but given the influx of huge amounts of fresh dollars that are going to be flowing into the procurement system, broadly defined, it is one of the most significant challenges that the Department faces, and one that we've reported on regularly.
Ms. Dalton, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree with the Inspector
Microphone, please.
I would agree with the Inspector Generals that it is kind of a mixed bag. Some agencies have and programs have more experience in terms of grants and contract management. But I think across the board, we're going to have a capacity issue because there's been so much money that is going into these programs. And we're going to have to, the agencies are going to have to be looking at what is the best way to implement the programs, where can they get the resources and the expertise, and in training their own people, the people that they do have, to manage these programs and the grants and the contracts, and following best practices in terms of setting clear expectations for each of the grants and contracts and monitoring them.
No, I'm done. Could I add one thing, Mr. Chairman, to my answer? First of all, I want to, in the interest of being fair and balanced, which I want to be, the department's procurement officials are aggressively trying to retain and recruit. They have for example, their retirement eligibility rate is quite high, but they're making aggressive efforts to try to retain and recruit the skilled workforce that they need to handle the influx of additional cash. So I want to be fair to them as well. They are making Herculean efforts to try to meet their responsibilities.
My time has expired. Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume all y'all were here in my previous line of questions with the first panel. I wasn't convinced by the answers that I got. And I see you guys as street cops. And I see what you need to do is operate as street cops. And I know a street cop, when something's out of place, out of character, they start scratching and digging and looking into things. And they also look into the people who they know have already committed crimes or are accused of committing crimes. And we already know that there are entities out there, such as Acorn, who are, as an organization, under investigation in, I think it's 17, 18 states for criminal activity. I'm extremely concerned about the census and about the possibility of the Department of Commerce contracting with entities like Acorn. And I just would like a yes or no answer. Can y'all assure me that you will utilize available data that, and I understand that maybe it's a GAO that has a list of entities who are under criminal investigations. Will y'all let the agencies know that you're going to look very strongly to make sure that criminal entities or criminally accused entities are not given contracts to carry out projects that so that the American people can be absolutely sure that there's not any of these shifty, shady groups that are doing the people's business? Please start with Ms. Friedman.
Well, Dr. Brown, I'm not sure I can give you the satisfactory answer that you perhaps desire. We face these sorts of challenges every day because we have 200 to 300 potential criminal investigations ongoing at any given time in dealing with Department of Energy or Department of Energy related entities. So it's a problem we face. What I can tell you is the following. When we have a criminal investigation and we understand that a contract or a grant is to be awarded to that entity, assuming it will not compromise the investigation, assuming we will not compromise grand jury information, assuming that we appropriately coordinate with the Department of Justice, we will inform the department's program managers of the ongoing investigation, and ultimately they'll have to make the decision as to whether they will proceed with the contract or the procurement or not. Now, I know nothing about the Acorn investigation other than what I've seen in the media, so we're not familiar with that. I will tell you as well that, and I know this is obvious, that the mere fact that there is a criminal investigation, and I'm not defending anyone here, should not necessarily lead anyone to conclude that ultimately there will be a charge resulting from the investigation. So it's a very tricky, difficult area, but I tried to explain the steps that we go through to make sure that management, who ultimately awards the contracts, is aware that there is an investigation, and they'll have to make the ultimate judgment on that.
Mr. Zinser?
Sir, I think you're going to find that Acorn is working with the Census Bureau on their partnership efforts. I don't know that they're getting any money, sir, but I think that they are working with the census. But I think what you have to do is identify those Acorn groups that are under investigation and see whether they're actually working with the census. And then if the census has some criteria that they can use in terms of the groups that they're associating with, you know, they have to make those decisions. But we would certainly be willing to help you get answers from the Department or the Census Bureau about where that's occurring.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm extremely concerned about this because of the integrity and importance of the census. Just in the sake of time, I'm just let Mr. Cross answer that, and Ms. Dalton too in writing, and Ms. Norcross, if you have any ideas about that, I'd appreciate your thoughts. But Ms. Norcross, in your testimony, you mentioned that a number of recommendations for recovery.gov. How early will these recommendations need to be adopted before more reporting starts to flow into the website?
The sooner the better. There's no time to waste. People right now are waiting to know how data is going to be displayed so they can start building websites and monitoring data. So in anticipation, even if the administration just lets people know how they intend to display the data, that would be a help.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired, so I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Zinser. As to the 2010 census, if you just do what you did in 2000, I'll be perfectly happy. If it ain't broke. That is...
Mr. Chairman, would you yield a moment?
Yes, Dr. Brown.
I would like to do the same thing. I certainly don't want to use statistical sampling in the census. People need to be counted. Real people need to be counted, and that's my concern. And I just don't want any election stolen. As a scientist, I want to see real data, and I'd like to see right over wrong. And statistical sampling to me is a way of interjecting a tremendous amount of potential for fraud and abuse. Okay. So
I did not want to defend the position of wrong over right. I was not speaking to the methodology. I'm not sure it is necessary that you actually touch each nose to do a nose count. But that ends our testimony today. Thank you very much. Under the rules of the committee, the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for any follow-up questions or answers. And I think at least one or two of the witnesses mentioned that they would provide further answers by writing, in writing. And with that, the witnesses are excused. The hearing is now adjourned. Go Heels.
Good job.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.